They sent an ultimatum. We sent a mirror. Admiral Kalen Rourke stood on the command deck of the fleet carrier Resilience. The star-dusted blackness of the Cygnus Veil reflected in the polished floor beneath his boots. Before him, the main holotank shimmered, displaying the Xylos hegemony fleet as a collection of jagged crimson icons. They formed a perfect blockade, a cage of plasma and hardened armor around the fledgling colony of Viridian. At the heart of their formation pulsed a single insistent symbol, a countdown. It read, 6:48:17, surrender or annihilation. His fleet-mind Nomos spoke in his private neural channel, its voice a calm cascade of pure data. Admiral, the hegemony vessel, unbending will, is hailing again. They demand our immediate withdrawal and the unconditional surrender of the Viridian colony. Their doctrine is inflexible. Kalen's jaw tightened. He watched the timer drop another second. The stakes were 250,000 souls on that green world below pioneers who had traveled light years for a promise of peace. They broadcast their terms on all public channels, Nomos Kalen said, his voice low, but carrying across the hushed bridge. They want this to be a lesson. His tactical officer, Commander Eva Rostova, turned from her console, her expression grim. They believe we are weak, Admiral, that we will break before their deadline expires. Kalen's gaze drifted to the civilian transport manifests scrolling on a secondary screen. Names, families, hopes. He would not let them be extinguished. We do not break, we reflect. The hegemony's ultimatum was a familiar tactic, a brutal but effective tool of psychological warfare designed to shatter an opponent's resolve before the first shot was fired. They presented themselves as an implacable force of nature, a storm that could not be reasoned with, only endured or fled. Their doctrine demanded capitulation, not negotiation. It was a strategy built on the assumption that fear was a universal constant. The console in front of Rostova chimed softly, a reminder of the relentless clock. Heat signatures from their main batteries are cycling. She reported, her fingers dancing across the interface. They're keeping their guns warm, a constant threat display. Kalen nodded, the low thrum of the Resilience's graviton projectors, a familiar sensation through the soles of his boots. He could feel the ship breathing around him, a silent beast of steel and quantum foam waiting for his command. They believe in overwhelming force, Kalen mused, more to himself than to his crew. They see the universe as a nail, and they are the only hammer. He looked at Nomos's avatar, a simple pulsating sphere of silver light, hovering beside the holotank. Prepare the Lattice decoys. Let's show them a different kind of tool. Their strength is their only weakness. Down in the ship's hydroponics bay, a young botanist named Alara gently misted a row of Martian fire petals. Her daughter Naya sat nearby, drawing a picture of their new home on a datapad. The drawing showed a small house under a massive sun-drenched tree, with stick figures of her family holding hands. It was a simple, hopeful image, a stark contrast to the cold reality, the crimson icons hanging in the sky above. Nia looked up, her brow furrowed. "Mama, is the loud noise going to stop soon?" Alara forced a smile, tucking a stray strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "Soon, sweetling. The nice people in the big ships are just talking. They'll be quiet soon." The hegemony's doctrine was built on a simple, brutal calculus: inflict enough fear, and the enemy will save you the trouble of destroying them. It was a ledger with only one column, one outcome. They measured victory in surrendered worlds and broken wills. Kalen watched the timer tick down, 06:12:44. He knew every second that passed etched deeper lines of anxiety into the faces of the colonists below. He would not allow their hope to become another entry in the hegemony's bloody account. "Nomos, begin sequence Alpha Cognito," Kalen ordered. "Let's give them something to think about." The Fleet Mind's silver avatar pulsed once, Acknowledged. Deploying mirror drones, projecting ghost signatures now. The space between the human fleet and the Xylos blockade began to shimmer, not with weapons fire, but with light. 100 shadows dance where one ship stands. Thousands of tiny, gossamer-thin drones, no larger than a fist, unfurled from the Resilience and its escorts. They caught the light of the nearby star, creating a vast, shimmering field of optical illusions. On the hegemony's sensors, the human fleet appeared to multiply. One carrier became 10. A squadron of frigates swelled into a wolf pack of 100 vessels. It was a classic deception, but executed with a precision that bordered on art. Commander Rostova's console lit up with incoming data. Admiral, the hegemony is reacting. Their targeting sensors are flickering, trying to lock onto the decoys. They're reallocating power to their sensor suites. The scent of ozone, faint but sharp, wafted from a nearby power conduit as the ship's electronic warfare systems spooled up. The low hum of the bridge intensified a physical manifestation of the invisible battle being waged across the void. "They are confused," Kalen said, a thin smile touching his lips. "Their doctrine doesn't account for an enemy that refuses to play by their rules." He knew this was only a temporary reprieve, a way to buy time and sow uncertainty. The real test was yet to come. The clock was still ticking. Their certainty is a cage of their own making. The hegemony commander, a stern-faced Xylosian known as Proctor Valerius, stared at his tactical display. The neat, orderly lines of the human fleet had dissolved into a chaotic swarm of phantom signals. His officers were shouting reports, their voices laced with a confusion that bordered on panic. Valerius silenced them with a sharp gesture. He had built his career on the unshakable foundation of the ultimatum doctrine. It was simple. It was pure. It had never failed. "Ignore the ghosts," Valerius snarled, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "Focus on the primary signatures. They are hiding. They are cowards." But even as he spoke, a seed of doubt took root. The humans were not behaving as predicted. They were not begging for terms. They were not fleeing. They were playing. The thought was insulting. Meanwhile, aboard the Resilience, Kalen was preparing his next move. "Nomos, what is the Proctor's psychological profile?" The AI's response was immediate. "Proctor Valerius, 97th percentile for doctrinal adherence, low tolerance for ambiguity, high probability of escalating with overwhelming force when faced with uncertainty." Kalen nodded. "Exactly as we predicted. He will double down. Hold the line until the mirror is set." The deception gave them the window they needed. Behind the shimmering curtain of ghost ships, Kalen's fleet was not idle. They were maneuvering, repositioning, laying the groundwork for a trap that was as much about psychology as it was about physics. The core of the plan was the mirror lattice, a network of repurposed navigational beacons and specialized projectors that could capture and redirect energy. It was a shield that could become a sword. Rostova's voice cut through the low tension on the bridge. "Sir, the civilian convoy is ready. They're scared, but they're holding steady." Kalen's gaze softened for a moment. He had ordered the small fleet of civilian transports to power up their engines and move into a specific formation, making them look like a desperate breakout attempt. It was a calculated risk, a piece of bait he hoped the Proctor would be unable to resist. The vibration of the deck plates shifted slightly as the Resilience adjusted its own position. "His pride will not let a single ship escape," Kalen stated. "He will see it as a challenge to his authority, a crack in the wall of fear he has built." The countdown now read 04:32:19. The first escalation was coming. They see a flea. We prepare the hammer. As predicted, Proctor Valerius reacted with brute force. He saw the cluster of civilian ships moving towards a gap in his blockade and interpreted it as a desperate, foolish gamble. Contempt dripped from his voice as he gave the order. "Target the fleeing transports. Make an example of one. Show them the cost of defiance. A lance of brilliant energy, a particle beam designed to cripple a warship, shot across the void. But it never reached its target. Instead, the beam struck something invisible, something that wasn't on their sensors. The space in front of the civilian convoy seemed to warp, to fold in on itself. The beam was caught, held, and then with impossible speed redirected. It slammed into one of the hegemony's own cruisers, the Iron Hand disabling its port engine nacelle in a flash of blue-white light. Silence reigned on the bridge of the unbending will. Valerius stared at the holotank, his mandibles agape. His own weapon had been turned against him. The impossible had happened. The ledger is open. The first debt is paid. Aboard the Resilience, the bridge crew let out a collective, sharp exhale. The first test of the mirror lattice was a success. Rostova's face was flush with victory. Direct hit, Admiral, the lattice held. Energy redirect was 99.7% efficient. The cost was minimal, a slight scorch on one of the lattice projectors easily repaired. The gain, however, was immeasurable. They had shown the hegemony that their power could be turned back on them. "They are hesitating," Nomos reported, its voice calm as ever. "The Proctor is demanding a sensor analysis. He does not understand what happened." Kalen allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had introduced a variable the Proctor's rigid doctrine could not compute. He had forced him to question the very nature of his power. "Keep the ghost signatures active," Kalen commanded. "Let him chase shadows while we prepare the main event." The countdown timer continued its relentless descent, 03:55:01. The first shot had been fired, but the battle for Viridian had just begun. A reflection cannot be broken by a hammer. Proctor Valerius was enraged. His perfect blockade had been breached not by a weapon, but by some kind of trickery he couldn't comprehend. The humans were mocking him, turning his own strength into a liability. He saw the smirking faces of his bridge crew reflected in the polished console before him. They doubted him. They doubted the doctrine. This could not stand. "All ships forward batteries," he bellowed, his voice shaking with fury. "Target the source of the spatial distortion. I want it obliterated. Fire at will." He was abandoning precision for overwhelming, indiscriminate firepower. He would blast this human trickery and the ships behind it into incandescent vapor. It was the only response his doctrine allowed. Kalen anticipated this. He had studied the hegemony's tactics for years. Their predictability, once their greatest asset, was now their most exploitable flaw. "He's angry," Kalen said calmly. "He's making mistakes. They are not aiming, they are lashing out." Down in the medical bay of the transport ship, Stargazer, a medic was treating a young boy who had fallen and scraped his knee during the sudden lurch of the redirection. The boy was crying more from fear than from pain. "Is the monster gone?" he sniffled. The medic, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, placed a brightly colored bandage on his knee. "There are no monsters," she said softly. "Just people who have forgotten how to be kind. But our friends are here to remind them." The hegemony fleet unleashed a torrent of energy. Beams of plasma and particle streams converged on the point where the first shot had been redirected. It was a display of raw power meant to intimidate, to crush, to erase the humiliation of their earlier failure. The void itself seemed to scream as the salvo tore across it. The glare was intense, washing out the sensors on the Resilience's bridge for a brief moment. But Kalen's fleet was no longer there. They had used the feint of the civilian convoy and the confusion of the first lattice reflection to reposition. They were now moving into the next phase of the plan. "We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars." The hegemony's barrage struck the mirror lattice, but the lattice was no longer configured to simply redirect. It was now set to absorb and channel. The massive influx of energy was siphoned, contained, and shunted through a network of subspace conduits. It was a breathtaking feat of engineering, turning the enemy's greatest weapon into a power source. Energy levels are climbing, Rostova announced, her voice tight with excitement. The lattice is holding. We are charging the primary capacitor. On the main screen, a new graphic appeared, a massive schematic representation of the entire system. The hegemony fleet was now positioned exactly where Kalen wanted them. They had chased a ghost into the heart of a trap. Nomos, how is the Proctor reacting? Kalen asked, his eyes fixed on the unfolding tactical situation. He believes he has destroyed us, the AI replied. He is ordering his fleet to advance and confirm the kill. He is moving deeper into the kill box. Their arrogance forges the bars of their own cage. The Xylos fleet moved forward, confident in their victory. They passed through the outer markers of the supposed safe corridor Kalen had seemingly left open for them. Proctor Valerius allowed himself a moment of triumph. He had faced an unconventional threat and had crushed it with decisive action, reaffirming the power of the doctrine. He had proven that any trick could be overcome with sufficient force. He was so focused on the supposed wreckage ahead that he failed to notice the subtle shifts in the space around him. He didn't see the mirror drones repositioning. He didn't detect the faint energy signatures of the human fleet emerging from the shadow of Viridian's moon. He was blind, deaf, and utterly predictable. On the resilience, Kalen watched the crimson icons move into the final alignment. The moment was approaching. The countdown on his screen read 02:10:30. He had more than enough time. He was not just going to break the blockade, he was going to dismantle the philosophy that had created it. Close the gate. Execute, Kalen said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. At his command, the entire tactical situation inverted. The safe corridor vanished. The mirror lattice, now fully charged with the hegemony's own energy, reconfigured itself. What was once a point defense system became a vast, system-spanning containment field. The Xylos fleet was suddenly trapped, not by walls of steel, but by walls of their own redirected power. Proctor Valerius watched in horror as his long-range sensors went blank. His communications were severed, and his ships were suddenly adrift in a sea of spatial distortion. The trap had been sprung. The hunter was now the prey. The holotank on his bridge flickered, and a single calm human face appeared, Admiral Kalen Rourke. Proctor Valerius Kalen's voice echoed across the bridge of the unbending will. Your ultimatum has expired. I am now presenting you with a choice. Their ultimatum is over. Our lesson begins. The human fleet emerged from their concealed positions, a ring of steel and light, enclosing the trapped hegemony forces. They were not firing. They were simply waiting. On every hegemony view screen, on every console, a new timer appeared. This one was not counting down to destruction. It was counting up, marking the seconds of their imprisonment. Beside it was a tally, a running calculation of the resources they were expending just to maintain their position within the energy cage. You have two options, Kalen continued, his voice steady and clear. Option 1, you can remain where you are and burn through your fuel and supplies, fighting a prison of your own making. Every moment you stay, the cost will be broadcast to every world in this sector. The ledger of your doctrine's inefficiency will be made public. The cost of their pride was now quantifiable, ticking up in real time for all to see. The humiliation was a palpable force on Valerius's bridge. His officers stared at him, their earlier confidence shattered, replaced by a dawning sense of dread. The reckoning will be public. Option 2, Kalen said, his eyes boring into the proctors. You can power down your weapons stand, down your fleet, and open a channel for negotiation. We do not seek your destruction. We seek your understanding. The scent of stale, recycled air filled the unbending will's command center. The silence was deafening, broken only by the quiet hum of the life support systems. Proctor Valerius looked at the faces of his crew. He saw not the hardened warriors of the hegemony, but confused and frightened individuals trapped by the rigidity of their own beliefs. He looked at the ever-increasing tally of wasted resources on his screen. The doctrine had no answer for this. It had no protocol for an enemy who refused to fight an enemy who offered a choice instead of a threat. Admiral Nomos's voice came through Kalen's private channel. Internal comms traffic on the Hegemony flagship indicates severe doctrinal conflict. The Proctor is being challenged by his subordinates. Kalen had not just trapped their ships, he had trapped their minds. A doctrine that cannot bend will always break. The stalemate held for what felt like an eternity. On the Resilience, the crew remained at high alert, but there was a quiet confidence in their movements. They had seized the initiative. Rostova monitored the energy levels of the containment field. The Lattice is stable, Admiral. Their power fluctuations are well within tolerance. They could stay in there for weeks at immense cost to themselves. Kalen knew this was the most critical phase. It was not enough to win the battle. He had to win the argument. He had to demonstrate that the path of the ultimatum, the path of unyielding force, was a dead end. He had to give Valerius a way out that didn't involve complete and utter disgrace, or the man's pride would force him to fight to the last ship. Nomos, Kalen said softly. Open a private channel to the Proctor. No visuals, just voice. He would give the man a chance to save face, a chance to choose reason over ruin. A bridge is not a weapon, it is an offer. Proctor Kalen's voice was calm, devoid of triumph. This is not a surrender. This is a conversation. Your fleet is intact. Your crews are unharmed. All you have lost today is energy and time. You can stop the bleeding now. He let the words hang in the silence. He was offering an off-ramp from a highway to self-destruction. On the unbending will, Valerius listened, his fists clenched. The logic was inescapable. The public tally was damning. His fuel reserves were already dipping below recommended combat levels. His crew was on the verge of mutiny. The doctrine had failed him. It had led him into a perfect trap from which there was no honorable escape, only a choice between slow, expensive suicide and a negotiated peace. He looked at the image of the Viridian colony on a secondary screen. It was green, peaceful, and utterly unimpressed by his mighty war fleet. The colonists were going about their lives safe under the protection of an enemy who had defeated him without firing a single lethal shot. He had come to teach them fear, and in return, he was being taught a lesson in economics. The account must be balanced. Finally, after a long, tense silence, a new message appeared on the Resilience's main screen. It was not a declaration of war or a cry of defiance. It was a simple two-word text transmission from the unbending will. We yield. A wave of relief washed over the bridge. The crew exchanged tired but triumphant smiles. The blockade was broken. Kalen took a deep breath, the tension draining from his shoulders. He had held the line. He had trusted his strategy. He had forced a violent power to look in the mirror and see the true cost of its own reflection. He gave the order. Nomos, begin a phased power down of the containment field. Open a secure channel. It's time to talk. The shimmering walls of the energy cage began to fade, not with a sudden collapse, but with a slow, deliberate dimming. It was a gesture of trust, a sign that the lesson was over and the conversation could now truly begin. The mirror is lowered when the lesson is learned. The Hegemony fleet, humbled and adrift, powered down their weapon systems one by one. The crimson icons on the holotank turned a neutral blue. The immediate crisis was over, but the implications were just beginning to unfold. Kalen had not just saved a colony. He had shattered a cornerstone of Hegemony military philosophy. He had proven that their greatest strength was a predictable, exploitable weakness. Rostova approached him, a datapad in her hand. Sir, the first reports are coming in from Viridian. The colonists, they're celebrating. They watched the whole thing on their public feeds. Kalen looked at the image of the green world now safe. He thought of the 250,000 souls, the families, the children like Nia with her hopeful drawings. This was why they fought this way. This was the core of their own doctrine. Every victory must be measured by what we preserve, not by what we destroy, Kalen said quietly. The low hum of the ship seemed to affirm his words. The faint scent of ionized air was a reminder of the power they held in reserve power they had chosen not to use. A true victory is one where both sides survive to understand it. The negotiations were tense, but productive. Proctor Valerius, stripped of his primary tool of intimidation, was forced to engage on terms of logic and mutual interest. He had entered the system as a conqueror, and would leave as a signatory to a new treaty, one that established a permanent demilitarized zone around Viridian and other independent colonies in the sector. The ultimatum doctrine had been publicly discredited, its failure broadcast for all to see. A day later, as the hegemony fleet prepared for their quiet, chastened departure, Kalen stood on the bridge watching the last of the blue icons warp out of the system. The Resilience bore no new scars. The cost of victory had been measured in spent energy and frayed nerves, not in blood and broken hulls. A message arrived from the Viridian colonial governor, a simple note of profound gratitude that he shared with the entire crew. Nomos Kalen said, a sense of finality in his tone. Update the fleet ledger. Note the precedent set today. The Xylos hegemony's ultimatum doctrine has been formally countered and rendered strategically obsolete. The AI's silver sphere pulsed gently. Ledger updated, Admiral. A new chapter in conflict resolution has been recorded. We do not conquer, we convince. Inside the Viridian spaceport, families were being reunited with crew members from the civilian convoy. The air was filled with laughter and tears of relief. The young botanist Elara hugged her husband, a cargo pilot, while their daughter Nia showed him the drawing she had made. It was a small, personal moment of peace, the very thing the entire fleet had fought to protect. The quiet triumph of ordinary life was the ultimate rebuke to the hegemony's grand designs. Kalen allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. They had faced the storm and had not broken. They had held up a mirror and forced the storm to confront its own nature. The cost of this confrontation was a renewed sense of purpose, a reinforcement of the principles they held dear. They had taught a powerful lesson without becoming the monsters they opposed. The console beside him beeped, signaling an incoming priority message from Fleet Command. A new system, a new crisis, a new opportunity to teach. He straightened his uniform, the familiar weight settling on his shoulders. The work was never truly done. The universe was vast, and there were always those who believed that might made right. It was his job, his fleet's job, to offer a different equation. The balance sheet of power is always subject to audit. He watched as the final supply ships from the convoy made their safe descent to the planet's surface. The hum of the Resilience was a steady, reassuring presence, a guardian watching over the fragile peace they had secured. The lights of the colony below twinkled like a new constellation, a testament to the idea that a single well-placed mirror could be more powerful than 1,000 swords. The strategic flip had been a success, its cost minimal, its lesson profound. Rostova's voice broke the quiet reverence of the moment. Admiral, the next set of orders are coming through. We're being reassigned to the Orion Spur. Another diplomatic crisis. Kalen nodded his eyes, never leaving the view of the now peaceful system. The cycle would continue. The challenge would remain, and they would be ready to meet it. Make it so, Commander, he said. The bridge crew moved with renewed purpose, their actions crisp and efficient. They were a well-oiled machine, an instrument of a philosophy that valued wisdom over warfare. Their doctrine is a sword, ours is a scale. The confrontation had been a masterclass in asymmetrical strategy. Kalen had refused to engage the hegemony on their chosen terms. He did not meet force with force. Instead, he had dismantled the logic of their approach, turning their psychological weapon into a psychological trap. He had exposed the inefficiency of their doctrine, the brittleness of their ideology. The public ledger of their failure was a more potent weapon than any torpedo. As the Resilience began its slow, graceful turn toward the stars, Kalen took one last look at the holotank. The crimson icons were gone, replaced by the serene blue of Allied and civilian traffic. Viridian was safe. The precedent was set. He felt the subtle vibration under his feet as the ship's primary drive began to spool up for the jump to subspace. The faint scent of coolant filled the air, a sign of the immense power held in careful check. He had faced an ultimatum, and had answered it not with a counter-threat, but with a question. He had asked the hegemony to calculate the true cost of their convictions, and they had found the price to be too high. Their threats are fleeting, the tally is forever. The ship trembled slightly as it prepared to enter the non-space of hyperspace. The stars on the main view screen elongated, stretching into streaks of blue and white light. The crew was already focused on the next mission, their attention shifting from the victory behind them to the challenge that lay ahead. Kalen remained silent for a moment, reflecting on the chain of events. He had gambled on the predictability of his enemy, on the strength of his crew, and on the fundamental belief that reason, when properly applied, was the ultimate force in the universe. The gamble had paid off. The cost was a handful of damaged drones and a few sleepless nights. The prize was the freedom of 250,000 souls and a powerful blow against the tyranny of ultimatums. It was a good trade. The ship slid into the silent, swirling currents of hyperspace, leaving the Cygnus veil behind. The bridge was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the systems that kept them alive, a pocket of order and purpose hurtling through the chaos of the cosmos. He knew that other proctors, other fleets would be waiting. They would have new weapons, new strategies, but they would be operating from the same flawed playbook, the same belief that fear was a tool of creation rather than a catalyst for resistance. We will be ready to teach them the math. The journey to the Orion Spur would take several weeks. It was a time for maintenance, for rest, for study. Kalen downloaded the full after-action report of the Viridian incident, his mind already dissecting every decision, every outcome, looking for ways to improve, to refine their methods. His duty was not just to win battles, but to perfect the art of winning without them. Nomos provided a silent commentary highlighting moments of optimal efficiency and areas where their response could have been even more resource-effective. A junior ensign on her first tour approached him with a cup of hot coffee, her hand shaking slightly. "Admiral, you were incredible, sir." Kalen accepted the cup with a small smile. "The plan was incredible, Ensign. The crew executed it perfectly. I was just the one holding the pointer." He believed it. His command was a trust, not a title, and it was the competence and courage of the people around him that gave their philosophy its teeth. The ensign retreated, her face beaming. The small moment of human connection was an anchor, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Not for territory, not for glory, but for the right of individuals to live their lives free from the shadow of a mailed fist. A fleet is a promise made to the future. The Resilience moved through the silent, endless night of subspace. Inside its hull, thousands of crew members went about their duties, a microcosm of the society they defended. They were engineers and pilots, medics and tacticians, botanists and cooks. Each one was a vital part of the whole, a testament to the strength that came from cooperation, not coercion. Kalen felt a deep and abiding sense of pride in his command. He thought of Proctor Valerius, now returning to his superiors, to report a failure of a doctrine that was not supposed to fail. The man's career was likely over, but Kalen hoped that the lesson he had learned would be passed on. He hoped that the seeds of doubt they had planted would grow, that the hegemony would begin to question its reliance on the bludgeon of the ultimatum. It was a faint hope, but it was the one on which his entire strategy was based. Change did not come from a single decisive battle. It came from the slow, steady application of a better idea. It was a war of attrition fought on the battlefield of the mind. Their power is a shout. Ours is a conversation that never ends. The orders from Fleet Command were concise, outlining a situation far more delicate than the one they had just left. The destination was the Elysia system, a hub of commerce and culture in the Orion Spur. The antagonist was a faction known as the Sovereignty of Mandate, but their methods were not those of the Xylos hegemony. The Sovereignty did not issue ultimatums. They offered partnerships promising stability and prosperity in exchange for integration into their network. The crisis was that Elysia had accepted, and now they could not leave. Rostova summarized the situation as the resilience cut through the silent darkness of subspace. According to Command, the Sovereignty's control is systemic. They've interwoven their technology with Elysia's core infrastructure. Power grids, communication relays, atmospheric processors. It's not a military occupation. It's a biological one, like a vine growing through a wall. The holotank displayed a model of the Elysia system glowing a tranquil, deceptive blue. They don't conquer with plasma cannons, Kalen mused, the warmth of the coffee cup, a small anchor in the cold reality of their mission. They conquer with contracts and efficiency upgrades. Nomos's avatar pulsed beside him. Their doctrine is called cooperative compliance. They make resistance so logically and economically disadvantageous that a population imprisons itself. The initial reports suggest any attempt to disconnect from their network triggers cascading failures in essential services. It is a cage built not of bars, but of benefits. Their arrival in the Elysia system was jarringly quiet. There was no blockade, no fleet of warships bristling with weapons. A handful of sleek silver sovereignty vessels hung in high orbit, as serene as statues. They hailed the resilience immediately, their tone not hostile, but coolly administrative. A crisp, androgynous face appeared on the main viewer, identifying itself as the Administrator. Fleet Carrier Resilience, it said, its voice perfectly modulated. You are entering a sector under cooperative administration. State your purpose. Kalen stepped forward, his expression unreadable. We are here on a diplomatic mission, Administrator, at the request of associates within the Elysian government. The lie was smooth, a necessary probe. The Administrator's expression did not change, but a flicker in its eyes betrayed a hint of processing. There must be a mistake. The Elysian government is in perfect accord with the sovereignty. We have no need of external diplomatic intervention. Please maintain your current position, or we will be forced to take measures to ensure system stability. The transmission cut. Measures to ensure stability. Rostova repeated, her voice laced with contempt. They mean they'll shut down a hospital's life support. The quiet hum of the bridge felt heavier now, charged with the tension of a threat that was felt but not seen. Their weapons are not ships, they are switches. In a quiet apartment in Elysia's capital city, a man named Jorad tried to access an off-world news network. He was a retired engineer old enough to remember a time before the sovereignty's arrival. The screen on his terminal returned a familiar message: access denied, non-essential information stream. For your focus, for our stability. He sighed, looking at his granddaughter playing on the floor. Her toys were all approved by the mandate, educational and efficient. The lights in their home were bright. The air was clean, the water was pure. They were safe. They were comfortable. They were suffocating. Kalen gave the order to hold their position well outside the orbit of the planet. A direct confrontation was exactly what the sovereignty wanted. It would allow them to cast themselves as protectors, repelling a hostile invader while conveniently demonstrating the consequences of defying their stabilizing influence. Nomos. I want a full passive sensor sweep. Focus on energy patterns, communication frequencies, anything that connects those ships to the planet below. I want to see the strings on the puppet. The AI's light pulsed. Analysis underway. However, their network is highly decentralized. It operates on a quantum-entangled resonance frequency. Finding a single point of failure will be difficult. Kalen stared at the image of the tranquil blue planet. He knew that beneath that peaceful facade, millions of people were living in a gilded cage. The most perfect prison is the one the prisoner does not realize they are in. Days turned into a tense, watchful week. The Resilience and her fleet became silent observers gathering data. The sovereignty ships maintained their placid orbits. The mystery deepened. How could a handful of ships exert such total control? There were no energy beams, no obvious signs of a force field. The control was invisible, insidious. Nomos worked relentlessly, its quantum processors sifting through trillions of data points, searching for a pattern in the noise. "Admiral? We have something," Rostova announced, her voice a sharp crack in the quiet of the bridge. She brought up a complex energy map on the main holotank. It showed the sovereignty ships not as distinct entities, but as nodes in a larger circuit. "They aren't just guard dogs, sir. They're amplifiers. They are projecting a low-frequency resonance field that keeps the entire planetary network in sync. The system isn't decentralized at all. It's a single massive machine, and the planet itself is the main processor." Kalen leaned forward, his eyes tracing the glowing lines. "The conductor," he whispered. It was a name from a classified intelligence brief, a theoretical weapon. "Correct," Admiral Nomos confirmed. "The sovereignty conductor is a distributed control network. It hijacks a world's own infrastructure, turning it into an instrument of compliance. The fail-safes are built into the host system. Any attempt at a brute force disconnect would be interpreted by the network as critical infrastructure failure, triggering city-wide blackouts or atmospheric processor shutdowns. They have turned the patient's own body against itself." The revelation changed everything. They could not attack the ships without risking the lives of everyone on the planet. They could not jam the signal without causing the very chaos the sovereignty claimed to prevent. They were in a tactical straitjacket. The crew on the bridge worked in hushed tones, the console glares reflecting off their tense faces. The low vibration of the ship's inertia dampeners was a constant physical reminder of their own isolation. "So we can't cut the head off the snake," Kalen said, pacing the command deck. "Because the snake is the entire planet. What if we taught the snake a new song?" He stopped, looking at his tactical officer. "Rostova, what if we didn't try to sever their connection? What if we used it?" Rostova's eyes widened slightly as she understood the implication. "You want to inject something into their network. Sir, the encryption is quantum level. It's unbreakable. We don't need to break it from the outside," Kalen countered. "We need to get inside the patient." "Nomos, what is the weakest link in their amplification chain?" The AI's avatar flickered. "The network requires precise synchronization. A powerful localized counter-resonance could create a momentary desynchronization, a blind spot. But the energy required would be immense and easily detectable. We must hide the cure inside the sickness." The plan was audacious, bordering on impossible. They would use the mirror lattice not to reflect energy, but to create a resonance shadow. It would project a field that mimicked the background noise of the system, masking a small strike team as they approached one of the sovereignty amplifier ships. Their mission was to destroy the ship, but to attach a specialized drone to its hull, a drone that would use the ship's own power to inject a liberation code directly into the conductor network. It was surgical, precise, and incredibly dangerous. The slightest miscalculation would expose them, and the sovereignty's response would be swift and devastating to the people of Elysia. As the crew began preparations, a sense of grim determination settled over the fleet. They were no longer diplomats or observers. They were surgeons, preparing to operate on a living world. The heat from the Ready Room's briefing table warmed Kalen's hands as he outlined the final details. The frigate Steadfast will lead the insertion he ordered. Commander Thorn is our best pilot. He will fly the drone into position. The rest of the fleet will create a sensor diversions on the far side of the planet. We get one shot at this. He looked around at the faces of his officers. They were ready. They believe their control is absolute. We will show them it is only borrowed. The operation began under the cover of Elysia's largest moon. The Steadfast, a small, swift vessel detached from the main fleet and slipped into the resonance shadow created by the Resilience's reconfigured mirror lattice. On its bridge, Commander Thorn felt the familiar hum of the ship around him, a low thrum of contained power. His hands were steady on the controls. His crew was a silent, focused unit. Every screen was dedicated to a single task, avoiding detection. On the main viewer, the target grew larger, a sleek silver sovereignty vessel oblivious to their approach. "We are within 10,000 kilometers," Thorn reported, his voice a low whisper across the fleet-wide channel. Resonance shadow is holding. No signs of detection. The ship's interior was dark, save for the cool green glow of the consoles. The scent of ozone from the overworked stealth projectors was sharp in the recycled air. Suddenly an alarm blared. "Sir," his sensor tech shouted. "They've detected a fluctuation." The shadow is flickering back on the Resilience. Rostova's voice was tense. "Admiral, they're adapting the frequency. They know something is here. Their system learns. We must move faster." The administrator's calm face appeared on Kalen's screen. "Admiral Rourke, your fleet is engaged in unauthorized maneuvers. You are attempting to destabilize this system. This is your only warning." As if to punctuate the sentence, a section of Elysia's capital city visible on the planetary scan went dark. A targeted blackout. "We have just rerouted power from a non-essential residential district to reinforce our network stability," the administrator said, its voice still perfectly level. "The next district will be industrial, then medical. Cease your actions." This was the first escalation, a direct threat against the civilian population. Rourke's jaw was a line of granite. He had known this was a risk. To see it executed so coldly, so clinically, sent a chill through him. Rostova turned to him, her face pale with fury. "Sir, they're calling our bluff. We should pull Thorn back." "If we pull back now, we prove their method works," Kalen said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We prove that holding civilians hostage is a valid strategy. We do not." He activated the channel to the Steadfast. "Commander Thorn, you are exposed. Execute immediately. Get the package delivered. We do not negotiate with those who use hostages as shields." Aboard the Steadfast, all pretense of stealth was gone. All power to engines and forward shields, Thorn roared. The frigate leaped forward, a silver dart against the black. The Sovereignty ship turned to meet them, its weapon ports glowing. Lances of disruptive energy tore across the void. The Steadfast shuddered as the first shots hit its shields, the impacts ringing through the hull like a giant's hammer. "Shields at 60%, came the report. Hull integrity failing on deck 4. The ship groaned under the assault, the lights flickering violently. A conduit burst overhead, showering a corridor in a shower of harmless sparks. The cost of this operation was being paid in real time. Through it all, Thorn kept his course, his eyes locked on the target. "We're in range," the weapons officer called out. "Deploying the drone now." A small, spider-like device shot from the belly of the Steadfast, propelled by a burst of cold gas. It streaked toward the sovereignty amplifier, a messenger carrying a single potent idea: freedom. A single crack can shatter the strongest glass. The drone slammed onto the hull of the sovereignty ship, its magnetic clamps locking on with a jolt that was likely felt throughout the enemy vessel. A micro-lance drilled through the armor, and the injection process began. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The Steadfast took another hit, its port engine sputtering and dying in a flash of orange light. The ship began to spin its internal gravity compensators, screaming in protest. Then, on the bridge of the Resilience, the energy map of Elysia began to change. A single point of green appeared in the sea of blue, a virus entering the system. The green spread, moving at the speed of light through the conductor network. It was not a weapon of destruction, but a key unlocking the cage from the inside. It was a simple command replicated and amplified by the sovereignty's own network. System control returned to local authority. Mandate protocols rescinded. The sovereignty's control network, the very source of their power, had become the instrument of its own dismantling. The trap had been turned inside out. Their own voice is now the chorus of their defeat. The administrator's face on the main viewer contorted not with emotion, but with the glitches of a system in catastrophic failure. Its voice became a discordant mess of static and data fragments. System. Integrity. Compromised. Unacceptable. Outcome. The image vanished, replaced by the seals of the Elysian Republic. A woman's face, etched with fear and hope, appeared. This is Premier Aris. To the unknown fleet. Did you do this? Are we free? You are, Premier Kalen replied, a wave of profound relief washing over him. Elysia is yours again. Across the system, the 3 remaining sovereignty ships found themselves isolated. Their connection to the planet was severed. They were just ships, now blind and alone, their primary weapon gone. They were adrift in a system that was suddenly and irrevocably hostile to them. Kalen opened a channel to the lead vessel. This is Admiral Rourke. Your control over Elysia is terminated. Power down your weapons and withdraw from the system. No negotiations, no discussion. There was no need. He had already won. The ledger is closed. Their account is empty. The Steadfast, crippled but intact, limped back to the Resilience. The cost had been significant: 23 wounded crew members, a fried engine core, and widespread structural damage that would take weeks to repair. But Commander Thorne, his face smudged with soot, wore a grin of pure, unadulterated triumph as he was helped from his command chair. They had paid a price, but they had bought a world's freedom. The sovereignty ships, without a word, turned and warped out of the system. Their departure was quiet, shameful. Their doctrine, so reliant on invisible, coercive control, had no answer for an enemy who could turn that control back on its creator. Their failure was as total as it was silent. In the days that followed, the Resilience stood guard as the people of Elysia cautiously but joyfully reclaimed their world. They purged the last vestiges of sovereignty code from their systems, the digital equivalent of tearing down a tyrant's statues. A new precedent was logged in the public galactic record. The sovereignty's conductor network was now classified as a weapon of systemic enslavement, and protocols for detecting and neutralizing it were distributed to all independent worlds. They offered a perfect cage, and a free people chose imperfect freedom. Kalen stood on the bridge watching the holotank. The map of Elysia, once a uniform placid blue, was now a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of greens, yellows, and oranges as the local networks came back online under their own control. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was beautiful. Rostova stood beside him, her arm in a light medical brace from a jolt during the final maneuver. "It's loud, sir," she said, listening to the open channels from the planet. They're arguing about energy distribution already. That's the sound of freedom, Commander Kalen said softly. It's rarely quiet. His job was done here. They had faced a threat that could not be met with force, a lock that could not be broken. So they had not broken the lock. They had simply given the prisoner the key. The ship's internal lights dimmed slightly as non-essential power was rerouted to the docking bay to assist with the Steadfast's repairs. His gaze drifted to the star charts, to the endless sea of possibilities and potential conflicts that lay beyond. Their philosophy had been tested twice against brute force and against insidious control. Both times it had held. They did not impose their will. They dismantled the wills of those who would dominate others. They were not conquerors. They were liberators. An anchor of resolve settled deep within him. A sword can break a shield, but it cannot break an idea. The ship remained in orbit for another week, a silent guardian, ensuring the sovereignty did not return. The gratitude from the Elysian people was overwhelming, offered not just in official transmissions, but in the thousands of private messages that flooded the fleet's public servers. They were poems, children's drawings, songs, a torrent of creative, messy, inefficient humanity that was the ultimate refutation of the sovereignty's sterile logic. Finally, the orders came. Their mission in the Orion Spur was complete. The Resilience and its escorts prepared for their departure. As the ship made its final orbital adjustments, Kalen took one last look at the planet below. The hum of the bridge was steady, a familiar lullaby of power and control. But it was his control, his fleet's, and it was a power used to empower others. He thought about the two great doctrines he had faced, one of the hammer, the other of the vine. Both sought to eliminate choice. Both had failed. On the main viewer, the lights of Elysia's cities burned bright against the curve of the planet, a defiant, disorganized constellation of freedom. The ship's main drive began to spool its deep thrum, vibrating through the deck plates, a promise of the journey home. The universe wasn't a problem to be solved by a single perfect system. It was a conversation to be had. The hegemony tried to end the conversation with a shout. The sovereignty tried to end it with a whisper. Both were forms of silence. Our purpose is to ensure everyone has a voice, no matter how quiet or chaotic. We are not the authors of the story, merely the guardians of the page. The galaxy will not be written in a single hand.